Yo guys, it's been a few weeks of PTR testing now, and there's been quite a few little changes and bug fixes here and there, and I wanted to update my tier list appropriately for how I'm feeling with everything considered. There's been essentially no real tank tuning yet, so this is very likely to change between now and when the patch goes live, so take it with a pinch of salt. A quick note about the dungeon pool before I go on is that there are a large amount of melee applied tank debuffs that are present, meaning parry and dodge tanks are extremely strong with this in mind. Not only that, but there are a ton of important interrupts, poison and curse dispels as well, and priority targets. Each tank gains value from being able to deal with each of those things, and any tank that can deal with a lot of it has insane potential to be meta. So let's get into it. With absolutely no changes just yet, Venge Demon Hunter remains in S tier. I won't spend too long on the spec because honestly there has been no changes, but for those of you out of the loop, there's just nothing wrong with it. It has solid overall damage and by far the best priority target funnel. Defensively, it has zero pitfalls. It handles every type of damage in the new dungeons without an issue. In fact, being a parry tank makes it even better in dungeons like Halls of Atonement right now, since you can avoid the bleed applications from the dogs entirely. They also recently changed some of the mobs that spam bolted the tank to cast on random members now, meaning the only scenario where you actually struggled as VDH before has completely disappeared. I'm still expecting some kind of nerf, but we'll have to continue waiting to see. It just brings too much to the table, with the best AoE mob control in the game, the best damage profile, and being basically immortal. The only real downside is a lack of group utility, but even that gets glossed over simply because you have Chaos Brand. Next up, I've decided to move Brew up to S tier. The recent buffs to Master of Harmony were huge, and now it's actually competitive, allowing you to swap between hero talents depending on the dungeon. Shadowpan still has a higher DPS ceiling, with stronger burst and better upfront damage, while Master of Harmony gives you access to the double Celestial Infusion and some solid consistency. Right now, the 4-piece for Master of Harmony is actually topping my DPS breakdown overall in keys, which is wild considering how underwhelming it used to be. Shadowpan is noticeably simpler compared to with Master of Harmony though, with less to think about rotationally to really milk the damage you can put out. I will say the spec is a little more healer reliant than Venge Demon Hunter, but if you're playing well, your healer does barely need to look at you in most pulls, and it's certainly not as attention hungry as people claim. It also still struggles with Mystic Touch benefiting far fewer DPS specs than other raid buffs. It was recently buffed up to 8%, which is pretty huge, but that could potentially affect the tuning of the specs benefiting from it, resulting in a net neutral depending on how Blizzard actually do their tuning. The lesser mob control compared to VDH is kind of evened out as well, since the melee specs you run with tend to have more on offer than the casters that DH plays with. All in all, Brew is easily doing the highest tank damage right now, while being very tanky, with utility that is particularly useful in the new dungeon pool. It's a ton of fun to play, and I'm glad it's looking really solid so far. This might surprise a lot of people, but I'm actually bumping Paladin up to A tier. With the dungeon pool in mind, this tank does everything you could want one to. You have high parry to avoid a lot of the tank debuffs on top of your usual immunities, while also having the best group utility in the game. 1 minute sack and its debuff immunity, cleanse toxins, freedom, immunities, lay on hands, it all just adds up to be ridiculous. The only downside this spec really has, particularly after the most recent hotfixes, is the damage is kinda bad, and its self-sustain is garbage too. I do believe Blizzard are getting ready to drop some solid Paladin buffs, since the most recent nerfs only hit big tier set outliers, but we'll see. Honestly, all this spec needs to be meta is solid damage output, and they are lined up to take the crown once again. Alongside Paladin in A tier is Warrior. I felt I needed to bump Warrior down, not because of any nerfs or changes to the spec necessarily, even though they did get that, but because the dungeon pool is just not ideal for them. Warrior is still the best at taking blockable physical damage, but there is a distinct lack of ability to deal with the bleeds and debuffs in some dungeons. The spec is still very promising, but I haven't had a tank felt more reliant on dwarf dispels than this one yet, and it can be really rough. The damage is still some of the highest still, and its self-sustain is still really good, especially in large pools, but it does fall off when things start to die. The AoE mob control is still really good, and having easier access to AoE silence is super nice, but the group utility is lacking. The only notable thing you provide is Battle Shout, which is okay, but is it enough when you have specs like Paladin rising in the ranks? I decided to move Bear back to B tier in the end. I know, I can't make up my mind, but the spec just isn't in a great spot. Their saving grace is their tankiness, and with the amount of debuffs applied through melees with no real way to deal with it, it can be really rough in some dungeons similar to Warrior. The main difference between Warrior in A tier and Bear that's down here in B tier is mostly the damage output and mob control. What Bear lacks in mob CC they make up for in utility though, with the solid off healing and dispels that they have, but they severely lack damage, most notably on single target. The spec is also just incredibly boring to play, to be honest. With the standard Alloon's Chosen build only ever spending rage on Iron Fur, it's really dull. The lack of flexibility in what you talent has also become a real issue, and I really hope Bear gets some love before the patch goes live. Last but not least, kind of, is Blood DK. With Grip as their raid buff, they offer next to nothing unless they are a numerical powerhouse. Their design, although very fun, hinders them in higher key levels since you eventually run into one-shot territory. It's just so much work to make this spec feel good in Season 3, and pairing that with the fact that you don't really offer any meaningful mob control, it does leave something to be desired. The damage is okay, and you have AMZ for the group, but comparatively the spec is simply in a state where it's not great and it's not bad, it's just okay. I do think the dooming that's going on is a bit unwarranted. Just because the spec isn't the best doesn't mean it's unplayable, but that's not validating. I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. That covers my thoughts on the tanks as we leave Season 3 of PTR testing. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. I know I disappeared for like a week, but I went away for a bit and now I'm back. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like to help me finesse the algorithm, and be sure to catch me when I'm live over on my Twitch, link in the description. I plan to make a more detailed video on the state of tanking as a whole real soon, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But for now, much love friends, see you in the next one.